Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask Me Anything Music Therapy. I had 5 people who could not make the meeting today but sent in their questions, so I will try to answer those questions live today and then I will share the video later. So the first question I got was, could you describe the basics of what a music therapist does and what a typical day could look like for you? So music therapists are trained to do lots of different things, and our lives are all pretty different from one another. It's a very broad field, and we all work in different settings. So some music therapists work in school districts with young children, and some people work in memory care facilities with older adults, and some people have private practices. So we're kind of all over the board as far as what we do. But a typical day for me also varies quite a bit because I have a private practice, but I also work in the hospital here in Portland. This is pre-COVID, by the way. Things are pretty different right now. A typical day for me would be going to the hospital. I usually start at the outpatient cancer clinic, and I do music therapy sessions with people who are receiving treatments. And so a lot of that is pain relief or just kind of relaxation. People are quite anxious, especially if they're new in that journey with their cancer treatments. And so I might sit at their bedside and just play music, talk about their favorite songs. Sometimes people get more involved depending on their energy level, and they might play instruments with me. So I always bring a lot of very accessible and washable musical instruments, percussion and mallet instruments. Sometimes ukulele, and encourage the person to play with me. And sometimes we will talk about the lyrics of a song and write our own verse or even make up music together. And then I spend a couple hours there. Sometimes I even just play what we call environmental music. So I try not to play music that is distracting to the environment, but I think about I listen to the sounds around me and kind of the mood of the room on a given day, and I create sounds and music that intersect with it and sort of make it less distracting, if that makes sense. That's something I used to do a lot more of when I was at Sloan Kettering or Beth Israel in New York City, because people were a lot more used to music therapists and weren't as freaked out when they saw someone playing music in the ICU or in a waiting room or something. It's a little harder in Maine. People really expect you to be like playing songs and kind of performative, and it has taken a lot of education to change that. So after I do that, I usually go to the main hospital, and there I work with families in the neonatal ICU and the pediatric oncology wing. I get a lot of referrals to the brain injury floor, the rehabilitation floor, so helping people work on their speech and their movement through music, and that is very rhythm based. I did the neurologic music therapy training, and we use mostly rhythm to help people walk with a steadier gait, or relearn key phrases that they'll need to be able to say. Everything from I love you to I need to go to the bathroom to I'm in pain. And I do a lot of co-treating with speech therapists and OTs and PTs, and sometimes even like the spiritual care staff at the hospital. What else? So that's what a typical day at the hospital looks like. My other days of the week, I have a private practice where I do in-home sessions. So I travel in between clients' houses, and I bring all my instruments and a lot of the same populations, but people that are well enough that they're at home and just still working on various goal areas. So that's kind of what my week looks like. During COVID, I have done virtual sessions only. During the summer, I was doing outdoor sessions with some of my clients, but it's mostly been virtual lately. And I have a side business with an art therapist called Expressive Wellness, and we do a lot of virtual trainings for healthcare professionals to learn how to use the arts and music, art and music in their own work with their clients. So we do that. We do some virtual retreats, sort of self-care and wellness retreats, and those are a lot of fun. So it's been a good way to kind of stay involved. Why did you decide to become a music therapist instead of another type of therapist? So this question sort of assumes that I wanted to be a therapist, which I guess I did. I was a musician long before I was interested in therapy. And I was teaching, I started on drum set and I was teaching drum lessons when I was in high school, I guess. And I just saw how powerful it was for people, just firsthand how music affects people emotionally and physically. You know, it makes people move, and it makes people smile, and it makes people interact and engage with each other. So my interest in music therapy grew from a pretty organic vision of the power of music. I think music therapy is a great way to change how people think about music and the arts in general, and change how people think about health. I like to come from a very whole health point of view. I think even if you're just working on physical or cognitive goals, you're also addressing, you have to kind of break through the barriers of your emotional needs and social needs. So I think it's important to look at people from that standpoint, and creativity is a great way to get to know people in kind of a safe and welcoming and fun environment. Yeah, I'm not sure that I would be great at other types of therapy, knowing what I know now, because music would be a part of it. I don't think I could go back and be like, I'm not using any music in my work. I am trained in the, talk therapies, because my master's degree is in music psychotherapy. So I could have just gone into being a talk therapist and using analytical approaches, or behavioral therapy, which I don't love. But all of those trainings just kind of inform how I work in music during and after and sessions, and vice versa. So it's all pretty ingrained. And it's informed the way I work as a musician now too, in bands. It's kind of hard to let go of my music therapy brain, and now I find it more frustrating when people are really like perfectionist. I do think there's a time and a place for that, but I love the joy of music, and I love the call and response that you can find with people. Yeah, it's a great field. Other things about picking it as a career, I don't know. I wrote a research paper about it in 9th grade, and I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. I know that isn't a normal experience, and I do feel weird about it still. And I've done plenty of other things. And I've been interested in plenty of other things, but that's the one I come back to over and over. So that's a sign, I guess. Okay, I have a question about mental health. What more do you think should be done to help with this topic of music and mental health, local and nationally? Interesting. I should say first that mental health isn't, I don't know how to word this. It's not that it's not a priority. It isn't the main goal area of most of the patients that I work with. I don't work in a psych hospital. I have, because I've had clients who have ended up there for a little while, and that's where I see them, and that's fine. And mental health is always addressed when working with the client. But because of the settings in which I work, our first goal is usually something physical or cognitive, whether it's fine or gross motor skills, or, regaining vowel sounds and mouth strength to speak. So that's not my main area, but I think there's a couple things in this question that need to be addressed. I think more people are starting to meet mental health needs in really creative ways with this sort of client-centered whole health approach, and that should and often does include the arts. So Bodhi, the art therapist, and I are seeing a lot more mental health professionals and counselors and social workers and school counselors coming to our trainings to find out how they can use art and music to reach people who might not be super comfortable talking about their emotions. We find that a lot in Maine, because we've got a lot of New Englanders who are pretty reserved and sometimes distrustful of therapists in general. So I find starting in music is a great way to just find out how somebody's doing without having to make them feel uncomfortable. The other side of this question that I find to be quite important is the mental health of musicians, which I think is not what the question asker is thinking about, but I do think it's really important. Musicians and music professionals often don't have access to healthcare, or don't have good healthcare, and are often doing fine financially, but just not set up in the same way that other jobs do. And the nature of being a musician, especially a performing or touring musician, is quite a stressful one, even when it's really fun. So you might be on the road a lot, you might be out late a lot, you might not have sort of a home base for a long time, very transient, and there are often, due to the places that people like to listen to music, there's often a lot of drugs and alcohol involved. And so I think that's an area that I feel pretty passionate about and haven't quite found the right way to address it. So, yeah, I'll leave that there and just let people think about that, I guess. How is music different from other forms of therapy? In what ways, these are multiple people's questions I'm combining. In what ways is music therapy more beneficial than other forms of therapy for health? And in what cases would you recommend music therapy over other forms of therapy? Wow. I think those came from 3 different people. So that's interesting. People are thinking about music therapy as an alternative. I don't think that it is an alternative, and I would not recommend that anyone replaces another therapy with music therapy. It's a great integrative therapy. It's important to include it for your overall health. Sometimes if people are feeling really stuck in talk therapy or something like OT or speech, music can help that person get kind of a jump start. And we often co-treat with those therapists. But I wouldn't, I don't know, I just don't necessarily believe in like alternative therapies. And I don't consider music therapy to be one of them. So I have had a few patients who are only doing music therapy, but it's usually short term, and I try to get them to a certain place with the goals and objectives that we've created, and then kind of push them to a different type of therapy or another therapist. And I always, when I'm doing intakes, I always do intakes from information from the other work that they've done with other people, and try to communicate with those other professionals while we're working. I don't know. It's kind of like saying when you're going through chemotherapy treatments, you certainly want to think about your diet and what you're taking in as far as nutrients and vitamins and things like that. But you don't want to just stop doing chemotherapy and say like, oh, I switched to a plant-based diet and I feel great. You want to try to inform all the things that you're doing with each other. I hope that makes sense. It does in my head. Okay, I have a few more questions. Do you think enough people are aware of music therapy? Wow, I have a different answer for this now than I would have 7 or 8 years ago. I think based on the number of people that email me with questions, I think people are somewhat aware. It's definitely getting there. But there's a lot of misconceptions about music therapy. I personally have talked to thousands of people in the last 20 years about music therapy, like since writing the paper in high school. And also, research has been growing and funding has been growing, which grows interest. I think interest grows from people seeing stuff on like the Today Show or something, or NPR. But what's equally important is that then helps fund programming and fund research. And a lot of programming can't happen until we have enough research. And that's where I get really frustrated, because, like a certain section of the hospital might be really interested in starting a music therapy program, but then they say, well, we need this to be evidence-based, which is completely fair. Yes, everything we do is evidence-based. But music therapy, you know, it's been around since World War II, but there hasn't been a ton of high level research going on in the same way that pharmaceutical companies have been able to do. Um, you know, as an example, like I was involved in some research for people with asthma and COPD when I was in my field work. So this is like pre-internship. And we were working in public schools with kids with asthma and at the hospital. And that was a huge project that went on for years after I left. And I still, you know, it got published, but it's still considered a very small project. And it doesn't seem to be enough that, like, when I moved to Maine and I was like, we should start an asthma program, it's still not enough, like, proof for people. So that is one of the sort of frustrations, is this kind of chicken and the egg thing. Like, well, we can't prove that it works if we're not doing the work to show this. So it's not like a drug that you can, like, test on animals, nor would I want to do that anyway. And as an aside, music does calm animals, so it's hard to strike the balance of saying, here's the research and then here's what we're going to do within that. And often I'm pulling together research from other areas, non-musical areas, and saying, here's how music fits into this. Yeah. So the misconceptions come, I think, from when people are like, oh, did you see the autistic person on The Voice? It's like, well, yes, that's just a musician. That's just an autistic person who has a musical talent, which is awesome. But that's not music therapy. Or when people say, did you watch the movie about the iPod program for people with Alzheimer's? That's not music therapy either. It might be part of a music therapy program, but it's not music therapy itself. It's an iPod. I don't run into a lot of people on the sidewalk who are like, oh, did you read that peer-reviewed research journal on the use of rhythmic entrainment to help adults with brain injury and reduced length of stay in the hospital? I would love it if people talked like that. And I always wonder when I, you know, run into a physician in the hospital elevator, should I be like, oh, did you read that peer-reviewed research? But that's not how things work, sadly. So, yeah, I think until people witness it firsthand or experience it firsthand, it's a little hard to understand. It's, you know, it's talking about music, and it's a very visceral experience. So that's part of it. I think it's also a very broad field. So the training is very intensive, and you have to know a lot. But I think my personal opinion is that you need to know too much, and so I have sort of stopped seeing clients that I don't feel fit into the training that I've been able to keep up with. So people you get this really broad training, and then you get your board certification, and you understand a lot about a lot of things, but then you tend to work in one section of the field. So for instance, when I get referrals now for early intervention or really young children who are maybe on the autism spectrum, I have not kept up with educating myself in continuing ed, and just haven't been doing a lot of that work. So now I just refer those people out, those families, and try to focus on the populations that I feel like I have the most experience in training with, because it is quite broad. And there's my cat, so that's my cue. I think that's all the questions for today. My next Ask Me Anything is April 11th, I think. So 2 months from today. And you can register for it by going to my website, mainmusicandhealth.com/askmeanything. April 8th, that is the next date, April 8th from 12 to 1, and I look forward to meeting with anyone. I've had a good mixture of students and other professionals who want to know about using music with different populations. Yeah, and I'm happy to answer any questions during this hour. All right, have a great day, everyone. Thanks. Bye.